Question 17. I call on the Honourable Member for Middle, Mr Shimmins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Chief Minister what plans he has to introduce identification as a requirement for all arrivals to the island's border.
On the Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I'm sure the Honourable Member is aware, the Isle of Man forms part of the Common Travel Area, or CTA. The CTA is an administrative arrangement between the UK, Ireland and the Crown Dependencies, which permits free movement between the UK and the islands, including the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The principles of the CTA are set out in UK domestic law in Section 1, subsection 3 of the UK Immigration Act 1971, which is extended by Order in Council to each of the Crown Dependencies. The Immigration Act places limitations on controls on free travel between the areas of the Common Travel Area. It would therefore be contrary to existing legislation to require identification for all arrivals as a prerequisite to entering the Isle of Man. There are some cases, such as certain arrivals from Ireland and also from countries out with the CTA, where identification is required to enter the island. There are also provisions which can be made by order under the Immigration, Asylum and Nationality Act 2006, which provides specifically for information to be shared between agencies for specific purposes. I would advise honourable members that identification can legitimately be required by air and sea carriers for purposes of security, and this is already done by some air carriers. The Isle of Man Constabulary and the Department of Home Affairs are currently exploring how this regime may be expanded further for the purposes of crime prevention, detection and national security. And I will ask our Treasury colleagues to liaise with the Steam Packet Board once we have the feedback from them. Under the current emergency powers regime, all entrants to the Isle of Man are asked to present proof of identity to confirm that they have a right to enter. Mr Speaker, as I'm sure the Honourable Member is aware, this is a complex area subject to several different pieces of legislation. For that reason, the answer to the question is not straightforward or easy to answer in a simple way. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Shimmins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful for the Chief Minister's response. And I do understand this is a complex area, and the Common Travel Area clearly is an interesting arrangement. Is the Chief Minister aware that since 1997 the Irish Government has been able to impose systematic identity checks on air passengers and also selective checks on sea passengers who are arriving? Is it his intention, therefore, from what he said, to progress a similar arrangement to safeguard the Isle of Man's borders?
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I want to be very careful in what I say here. I, like my honourable colleague, fully support a border force so that we know who's coming onto the island. For the prevention of crime especially, we have to be very careful on the system that we come up with to make sure we don't breach the Common Travel Area agreement, but we have found a way, and the Honourable Member has mentioned Ireland as a potential way. What we will do is, working with the police and the Department of Home Affairs, we will come up with a system to take it forward, and obviously working with our Attorney General to come up with the relevant legislation that we need, and we will then put that in place. And then we would expect, obviously, the operators of the steam packet to implement whatever changes that we feel require, but without damaging our legal responsibility to the common travel area. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mrs Corlett.
Mr Speaker, could I just ask the Chief Minister whether identification does actually need to be tightened at borders, because correct passenger lists are surely essential for companies providing travel to the island, if only for insurance purposes? Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I totally agree with my honourable colleague for Douglas Central. It's something I personally support. Are the checks. There has been a reluctance in the past to do this, but I think it's unacceptable that someone dealing in drugs can turn up, pay cash, give a fictitious name and come onto our island, and we do not know who they are and have no record. And I think that is an area that we can correct without breaking the rules of the common travel area, and I look forward to taking this forward. But as I've said in my initial answer to the Honourable Member for Middle, Mr Shimmins, it is highly complex. There are several regions of legislation that will have to be carefully dealt with to ensure that we steer our course through this to what I think we all want. I don't think there's anyone disagrees that we have to have identity checks, but it's ensuring that we comply with the laws of all of the countries who are part of the common travel area. Otherwise, we could find our residents unable to freely move around these jurisdictions.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you. Mr Speaker, can the Chief Minister at least acknowledge that there are in fact quite a number of people around the island who are uncomfortable with the notion of identity checks? There is that aspect to it as well. Secondly, can the Chief Minister confirm that the work that he describes as being current was actually also pursued in 2017 and it was reported in the programme for government as being completed? It's a difficult topic, will the Chief Minister agree, and we need to engage all of the Manx public because there is a tradition of libertarianism in the island, and also there is a tradition of going to watch football and going to watch football and going shopping without any identity checks.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think as long as we come up with something that's pretty simple to operate, that isn't too intrusive on people, then the law-abiding citizens of the Isle of Man and those coming to the island will be more than happy to ensure that their safety on the island and their children's safety and family from drugs, violent criminals is protected, and that's a small price to pay of showing your photograph, whether it be on your driving licence, bus pass, my card before the Honourable Member for Onken attacks me, etc., etc. It won't be draconian. I think it's highly important that we know who's coming onto our island to protect the people of this island.
Supplementary question, Mr Shimmins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I very much welcome the comments that the Chief Minister has made today, and I absolutely agree that these checks would help with the fight against organised crime, which can be damaging, very damaging to our communities. Perhaps you could just give us an indication of the timescale in terms of when we will see some progress in this matter. Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If memory serves me correct, in my answer to my previous question, Mr Speaker, I said to the Honourable Member that I hope to have border controls up and running by April of 2021.